Hello everybody, good morning or good afternoon depending on from what location you are actually dialing in. Welcome to the first webinar of EVBN today. It's going to be about Vietnam, the market potentials and opportunities, and some specific market entry questions and requirements. Before we start and go right into it, let me just briefly introduce you to the three people who are here today hosting the webinar. That's first Ms. Tao, our lawyer, who will present the market entry part. That's Ms. Tang Cao, who is responsible for all the technique behind this webinar and who's going to host the question part. And me, Jana Ackermann, the Deputy Director of the program, who will present you most of the Vietnam overview part, let's say. Some questions and remarks about the technical procedures. We have functionality in the webinar where you can pose questions. So in case you have any question during the webinar, please just type it into the text field and we will take it up either after the part is finished or at the very end, depending where it fits best. So just be aware that we cannot hear you or not hear any of your comments. So in case you have questions, please use this text functionality so that we can also take your comments into the presentation. And once again, of course, this is a webinar, so it's a bit hard to make it interactive, but we would, of course, be interested to get most of your interesting points or most of your interests in so that we can also cater our presentation towards it. On that note, let me start and go into the very first overview of who we are, because I'm sure not many of you have heard about EVBN, especially not if you are located in Europe. So the EVBN stands for EU Vietnam Business Network. So that's the organization we represent today. It is a project that was initiated by the EU in 2013 and is now running for roughly 1.5 years. I'm coming to the aims and objectives of the EVBN in a second, but just to introduce you to why we are here and why we are doing this, this is actually who we are, EVBN. So in case you see our logo more often now, we're more than happy to give you more information and to share more in the coming half an hour. What are we going to cover today? So we have 5 parts, but they shouldn't be strictly separated from each other. First, as I just mentioned, I'm going to talk a little bit about who we are and why we are here today and what we can offer to you. Then I'm going to do an overview of the Vietnamese market. That said, the Vietnamese market is large, just like any other market. So I'm going to just do a brief overview of that. And again, happy to take questions on it. Then Ms. Tao will present the market entry to Vietnam, so some legal requirements, some regulatory requirements that need to be taken into consideration. And before doing the question and answer, I will do a quick resume on the pros and cons if you decide or not decide to enter the market in Vietnam. EVBN, I just mentioned, is this EU-funded or co-funded project that was initiated in 2013. And the main rationale behind was and is that between the EU and ASEAN as a conglomerate, trade and investments are still quite limited. A lot of attention is given to China and also India, but ASEAN, as this conglomerate of 10 different Southeast Asian nations, has not yet been so much on the radar. So that is why the EU initiated these different EU programs in the region, and EU Vietnam Business Network is one of them. The intention behind is to support EU businesses, especially small and medium-sized enterprises, to come to the market and help them to really set a foot on the ground and be successful here in Vietnam. I think that's it in very short. So if you are dialing in as an EU business or an intermediate organization, I think this can be very interesting for you, because we have different programs and offers that could be very valuable for you. It's always nice to see pictures. So that's our team here, located in Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam. Very much female-dominated team, with our chairman and the rest 8 members women, and again all located here in Vietnam, doing all the different services which I come to in a second. The program was established around 4 different pillars. So just in very short, because that's, I don't think, the main interest of this presentation, we are doing different things in Europe, basically to meet the companies on the ground and to already spread the information at a very early stage. Then we provide a series of services, so feel free to also check our website, because you feel that there are a lot of services for free, like market research studies, like service provider overviews, like specific market surveys or SME case studies, which are again available for free. And as mentioned as well, this project was initiated not only in Vietnam but also in other ASEAN countries, so we also do that hand in hand with our colleagues in the region. This is a short overview of what we offer, but again, this is basically just to direct you to our website, where you can check out the information more detailed. And having just talked about ASEAN as the region, with the AEC, the ASEAN Economic Community, coming up very soon, making it one single market, just be aware that partner programs exist also in other countries in the region, where you can also, just like for Vietnam, address your questions and inquiries too. So that, again, I think makes it even more important to really see it as a regional project, not only as a country project. But now, going to Vietnam, which is the reason why most of you dial in today, I assume. So I think there are very different levels of familiarity with Vietnam, from people in the call. I think a lot of people in Europe still have this bit traditional picture in their mind, which you see on the upper part with rice fields, or maybe traditional costumes, or maybe traditional habits and traditional ways of working, which is also still true, because a large percentage of the population is in agriculture and is working not in urban environments. But you also see down below the sides of Ho Chi Minh City that Vietnam has turned into a very dynamic and growing market, which is really changing rapidly over the years. So you see a lot of progress, and that is really something striking for this country, that it's young. You have a population with the median age of 30 years, so you have a young working population that is ambitious to push forward, that has a very strong entrepreneurial spirit. So you see a lot of little shops opening, little businesses opening, and that is therefore pushing the economy further. So this is, I think, something which is sometimes surprising to people, depending on if they are in Europe, or whether they have already been to Vietnam or had in contact with Vietnam. But there are these two phases to take into consideration. A couple of facts which are always necessary to have in mind. It's a country with 93 million people, than Germany, for example, which is my home country, and just makes the potential of this consumption base already quite apparent. With this population comes a middle class that's developing, and that's developing fast, especially in the cities, Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City. With Hanoi being the political, sometimes some people also say cultural city hub, and Ho Chi Minh City as the economic hub in the south. I already mentioned that it's a young country, which is then also reflected in very dynamic ways of going forward. And this is something not to forget and to stress over and over again, it's a gateway to ASEAN. With this single market approaching, having one foot in Vietnam means you basically have access to the rest of the region as well. So that makes it, of course, interesting in that aspect as well. A lot of people also still remember some historic data of Vietnam and some historic facts. And even more impressive is the way that Vietnam has taken in the last years, starting in the 1986 with the Doi Moi policies, and then basically coming all the way to today, where the ASEAN Economic Community will be built, and also the EU-Vietnam Free Trade Agreement is on the way to be signed, which basically means a lot of facilitation and easing of doing business between EU and ASEAN. It's not signed yet, but it's expected to be signed this year. The figures you will probably have heard about already, or which you can easily find, of course, as well. The GDP growth rate in 2014 was roughly 6%. The inflation was at an all-time low of 4%, which are indicating and contributing to this development growth story I was already mentioning for Vietnam. GDP per capita is obviously also increasing. And something interesting to point out maybe is the part below. Who are the biggest foreign direct investors? And there you see that Korea, Singapore, China, Japan actually make up a huge part of the investments, meaning that the neighboring countries are still, let's say, further ahead of Europe to make investments, to also build long-term relationships. And that's our aim as well, to contribute to also European businesses making these relationships and trade and investments here in Vietnam. Obviously, Vietnam is not a standalone country anymore. It's integrated into the global economy like any other economy. Just an interesting, let's say, discrepancy here. Most of the supplies, most of the imported articles still come from China or ASEAN countries, whereas on the client side, we see Europe and the US as the dominating players. Also a word here, depending on your business, depending on the service or manufacturing sector you are in, would also have to look at which products are available in Vietnam, which raw materials, and which ones would need to be imported. I always talk about the example of cotton, for example, which is by majority imported from other countries. So again, this would be a case-by-case evaluation, but there you see that some materials are imported to Vietnam to be then assembled here and sent to other countries in the world. Well, key sectors are, let's say, hard to really pinpoint because in general I would see potential in almost all sectors. We pointed out in terms of the project and also as some focus areas based on an evaluation we did, we will put the attention to a couple of them and specifically. Where we see a lot of potential is in all fields concerning machinery, equipment, especially in terms of high technology products. Here also the Vietnamese government pushes for, let's say, sectors up the value chain, not only the assembling or lower cost labor services or manufacturing services, but also high-end products, high-end production processes. That's a sector where Europe, of course, has know-how and the relevant technology. So we do see a lot of potential here, especially for specific sectors like green technologies, where I think the demand and supply side match. So there's a lot of knowledge and technology in Europe, and there's demand from the Vietnam side. The same holds true for IT services and ITC in general. In, let's say, all areas, we have the hardware part, where just investments from Samsung and Nokia raised a lot of awareness lately, where Samsung transferred their biggest mobile production center to Vietnam. So there's, in terms of production, a niche or an opportunity here, but also in terms of e-commerce. The internet, of course, holds a variety of opportunities, and everything concerning e-commerce, because it's still at an infant stage in Vietnam, sees a lot of potential in the future. It's still very small, but it's growing. And then, as I mentioned, everything connected to this growing middle class with a growing income also has potential here in Vietnam, meaning lifestyle products, everything concerning furniture, households, appliances, healthcare and cosmetics, and the large sector of agro-food, where we just hosted a mission early this year with companies from Europe that brought in their branded products from Europe to Vietnam. And we saw a lot of interest in this area and a lot of growing demand for these products. Before I hand over to my colleague and give you some more concrete information, let me point your attention to two activities we are doing as part of the program, which could be very interesting also for European-based listeners. We have a lifestyle mission coming up in October, which is basically including everything around the house, as I just said. So what we do in these missions is that we bring in 15 European companies, we select them, and we connect them to Vietnamese partner in individual missions. We do both cities, Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City, because we think they are very different in terms of consumption modes, in terms of also partners there. And as I said, we just had the first agro-food mission, which is, for us, a step into the market. So if you attend this mission afterwards as a business, you would be much better in a position to evaluate whether this market is really for you, or whether it might not be, or might be too early, or might not be the right fit, or whether the Philippines might be the better market for you. So I think this is an evaluation stage, and therefore a very valuable and good opportunity for companies to come. Since it is an EU project, there is subsidies behind, so it makes it even more attractive. The same initiative we will do on the green sector, where the trade mission will be integrated into an exhibition. And this will take place in November, in the end of November, from 24th to 27th of November, and will be integrated into an exhibition taking place here in Vietnam. But again, I don't think this should be the main focus of this presentation. We are happy to provide more information after we finish. So now I just see if there's any questions. Otherwise, I hand over. Okay, we have one saying, you talked about different sectors. Are there any sectors which are restricted or forbidden in Vietnam? Again, this would be a case-by-case evaluation. There are sectors that are restricted in terms of you might need a Vietnamese partner, or there are different requirements, like charter capital that needs to have a certain amount. There are also sectors which are not able for foreign companies to come in, especially everything concerning media. but that would be an evaluation we could do if we know the specific sector you're in. Okay. Then I think at this stage I would give the word to Tao, our in-house lawyer, and she will talk about market entry a bit more in detail.
Thank you, Jana. So, market entry. As mentioned by Jana earlier, Vietnam has joined the WTO in 2007, and this is considered as a major step for Vietnam in its open policy, open door policy, and open its market to the world. To become a member of the WTO, Vietnam had to make a list of commitment to open its market, and under the WTO commitment, Vietnam would specify some sectors that are open to foreign investors, of course from the member state of the WTO. Second is also state the sectors that are unbound, which means it's not committed, and foreigner who would like to come into this sector would face some difficulties. The third group of sector would be open with restriction. It means to get into those sectors, foreign investor would have to meet some conditions. For example, minimum investment capital, or there could be a cap on foreign ownership, or they have to meet an economic need test, or form of commercial presence might be restricted to a form of joint venture and not 100% foreign owned. And lastly, the group of sector open with the roadmap, which means sector will be gradually opened according to a schedule. For example, market research, before the 1st of January 2009, they only can access the market in the form of a joint venture, but after that, 100% foreign owned would be allowed. So to get to know which sector you would like, you are interested in the Vietnamese market, you can look into the commitment and see what the conditions are open for you. Second, as also mentioned by Jana earlier, Vietnam and the EU is negotiating and expected to conclude a free trade agreement in 2015. The rationale behind this is Vietnam is the second largest trading partner. EU is the Vietnam's second largest trading partner, and for Vietnam, for EU, Vietnam is the fourth largest trading partner in the ASEAN and the 30th in the world. In June 2012, after the region-to-region negotiation on a free trade agreement with the ASEAN countries proved difficult, the EU and Vietnam has launched negotiation, and hopefully it will be concluded in 2015. So far, 12 rounds of negotiation has been conducted, and the latest round has just been held in Hanoi from the 23rd to 27th of March 2015. Negotiations cover tariffs as well as non-tariff barrier to trade and other trade-related aspects such as public procurement, regulatory issue, competition, services, intellectual property rights, and sustainable development. Once the EU-Vietnam FTA is concluded, it is expected that the trade in goods and services will be largely liberalized and the investment environment will be more favorable to EU investors. The ASEAN As also mentioned earlier, economic relation with the whole ASEAN region is the goal of the European Union, and it is understandable because at a single entity, ASEAN would rank the 7th largest economy in the world, and this is where the fast economic growth promises a lot of potential and opportunities. Vietnam became a member of the ASEAN from the 28th of July 1995, and currently one of the ASEAN 6 majors out of the 10 ASEAN members. Once you do business in Vietnam, it would be easy to open the door to the whole ASEAN region with the free flow of goods, free flow of services, free flow of investment, free flow of skilled laborers, and freer flow of capitals. They could be created by the regional groupings such as the ASEAN Economic Communities, AEC, the ASEAN Free Trade Agreement area, AFTA, and currently the ASEAN has concluded free trade agreement with other major trade players in the world, such as China, Australia, New Zealand, India, Korea, and Japan, South Korea and Japan. The AEC aimed to be fully established by the end of 2015 through the process of integration. Is a product of various and successful declaration and agreement between the ASEAN member states. It aimed at creating a single common market across the ASEAN nations. So you can see the great potential of how entering the Vietnamese market opened the door to a much larger market, not only to the ASEAN countries, but also its regional partners, those of the biggest trade player in the world. Last but not least, market entry would be much more open with the pro-investment legal framework, which has been the very recent positive step of Vietnam to welcome foreign investment. I would like to talk a little bit about the very new corporate and investment law, which was recently passed by the National Assembly in November 2014. One of the most significant changes under the new corporate law is to allow company a much greater freedom in which activity they may conduct. Currently, a company in Vietnam can only conduct activity within the specific business line in their business license, which limits their ability to conduct new activity without going through another licensing process. Under the new law, the business license would no longer include information on business line, and company would be able to carry out any activities as long as it's not prohibited by law. The licensing process is also expected to be simpler and quicker, with a turnaround time of only 3 working days. Before, it could last long as 45 working days, and that is in the law, and in practice it could be a lot longer. So this is a very positive step. The new corporate law also gives companies more flexibility in their internal administration. They now can have multiple corporate sales and choose their form and content. The law also officially recognizes that electronic facilities can be used to ease shareholders' participation in and voting at management and shareholder meetings, and meeting minutes can be kept in digital forms. Another law that can be seen as a very positive welcome step for Vietnam to welcome foreign investment is the law on real estate. So recently it has passed the law on land, the housing law, and the law on real estate business. Under the new law, a foreign investor for the first time would be able to acquire land practically on a freehold basis. Foreigners can now buy and own not only apartments but also houses in residential projects. The duration of ownership right for foreigner is still 50 years, but such duration is now extendable, and if married to a Vietnamese citizen, a foreign individual would be entitled to a permanent ownership right. And another significant change introduced by the new law is that foreigner can now buy property for business purpose, such as for leasing or using as his own office. The prohibition on subleasing by foreigner has also been lifted. It allowed foreigners to lease a residential house, offices and facilities, and then sublease them. Together with this law, other laws like banking and finance laws, law on security, commercial law, and law on corporate income tax also provide very positive provisions for foreign investors. That being said, there are a few precautions we would like to draw your attention to with regard to the market entry to Vietnam. First of all, despite the positive improvement of the authority in the licensing process, you should be prepared to face some delay. Sometime in the law is a timeline, but in practice, the local authority might have to consult with the upper level, or there's some check that needs to be done. So please expect some delay might be experienced. Secondly, there might be some inconsistency in the legal framework where different branches of law might conflict with each other, or also the inconsistency of the authority in different localities. For example, I have dealt with one question from our client, for example, in applying for work permit for a chief rep in Ho Chi Minh City, and in Ho Chi Minh City they say that the chief representative of a representative office still have to apply for a work permit. Meanwhile, in Hanoi they say they don't have to. So the application of law might be different from different locality. Thirdly, a foreigner may also encounter some confusion or displeasure where the local authority might provide further requirement to the nationwide regulations or some rights which, although being clearly stated under the law, but might not be acknowledged or implemented in practice. So that is some pitfall to be watched out for, but we still believe that the investment environment in Vietnam is getting better and better, and more welcome to foreign investor. And now to at a summary, I would give back the word to Jana. She will give you some more brief information about what to consider in whether you decide to come into the Vietnamese market, and then we will open for Q&A session.
Okay, I think I try to do this very quick because you already got a lot of information on Vietnam and especially on market entry. And then we go into the Q&A, because I just see that we got a question, but we take this after the session then. Okay, we need to go to the next slide. Okay, perfect. So, as we mentioned, Vietnam holds a lot of opportunities, and we really believe that it's an interesting market to put some more attention to. But it is not to forgotten that there are some hurdles, there are some difficulties that companies face, especially when coming from Europe, where the ways of doing business are a little bit different. I think the first rule I would put out as a pragmatic approach would be to find a suitable partner on the ground. May it be a distributor, an importer, an intermediate organization, or some person you employ locally, or even somebody coming from your home organization and staying in Vietnam for a while. You need to have somebody on the ground to get your business started, to monitor it for a while, and to understand the local customs, the local ways of working, the local ways of doing business. I think this is the main advice I would give companies who want to set up in Vietnam. Then we already learned that some patience definitely helps. So it does not only mean that it's an investment in time, but also an investment in money, but also in time, which you need. We just heard to get a license takes on paper 45 days, but in practice it can really go up to half a year, even further. So it really does help to span the time frame of this initial period, so that just to get the expectations right. And some things are of course also integrated into cultural differences. Sometimes pictures say more than words, so I'm not going to really comment on it, just to mention that, let's say, the Western world is more on the blue side, whereas the Vietnamese or probably Asian way of doing things is more on the red side. It does take some adaptation and some patience to get into it, but that's even more and the beauty of it, I would say, as well, to understand it and to get into it. So maybe to sum up, this is of course simplifying a very difficult decision. So we would also have to look at individual cases here, but Vietnam still has some challenges that should be pointed out. I would say the bureaucracy is one, to understand how things are working and to also have the patience to go and get the few stamps you need as something you need to consider. The laws change quite frequently, so also to have somebody on the ground who knows what it means and who gives you guidance on what might change for you is quite vital in our opinion. That's also partially what we can help with. In some sectors, if you are in the manufacturing field, you would need to see what raw materials are available in Vietnam and which one need to be imported. And then something very important to point out, whereas you have a very ambitious and young, big workforce, skilled labor in some sectors is scarce. So you would need to invest there in persons and as well, especially in key staff, also to retain them properly, and then they could take that further. But it's not, in some sectors it's quite tough to get the skill set you would probably find easier in Europe. On the positive side, once again, we already talked about the market potential, so that's something I don't want to go into again. But it's also the Vietnamese mentality, I would say, especially also in terms of working mentality. It's a modernizing industry, also pushed by government initiatives. It's a young labor force. You still have a wide variety in terms of wages. It's of course still being seen from some angles as a low-cost labor country, which might be true in some areas and in some regions, but it's definitely not true anymore for all the jobs, and especially not in the cities. So again, there would need to be analysis behind. Can just share that minimum wage is roughly $100, but that definitely depends on the region, and that doesn't mean that you get a good salesperson for $100 per month. That's then for the other manufacturing jobs. So again, a bit of more detailed analysis needed. And it's a growth market, 93 million people. with large and strong GDP growth. So coming from Europe, that's certainly something which sounds appealing. Maybe a few words of what's going on for us in the next couple of months. We're going to Europe in the next few weeks already to present EVBN in Vietnam and to also have individual talks with companies. And then we already pointed out the 2 big missions at the end of the year that could be interesting for any company or any of your companies if you're an intermediate organization to attend. And with that, I would just like to point out 2 things. One is that you can contact us anytime with further questions or with different things you might have in mind, different ideas, different questions. Just contact us. And then one thing which is important for our webinar, because this is the first one, so we would of course like to get your opinion on that. You will have a survey after this webinar is finished, just right afterwards. It doesn't take long, really, and it would be very helpful for us to get your feedback to see what we can do differently and what you thought about the information we offered today. Okay, and now we could go straight into the Q&A, and I think the first question would be for Tao. We just some question. We do it that way. We read the question and then we answer it straight away.
Thank you, Jana. Our first question relating to market entry. And WTO. If a sector is not mentioned in the WTO, how can we know whether it is open to foreign investors? To answer this question, it will depend. The local authority will treat these cases on a case-by-case basis, and whether it is open to a foreign investor would depend on the bilateral or regional relations with the country where the investor is from, or it will depend on economic needs of Vietnam at the time when the investor come in, or it also depend on the current policy of the Vietnamese government at this time. The next question, I think it's for Jana.
We recently hear that many companies are moving from China to other ASEAN countries, also to Vietnam. Is the main reason low-cost labor? First assumption on that would be threefold, I would say. Of course, low-cost labor does play a significant role, and as I said, into manufacturing or labor-intensive areas, Vietnam still has a big advantage on labor costs because minimum wage, as I said, is around 100 USD per month. That depends on the region, but that's the minimum wage which was stipulated. So I am not, frankly speaking, aware of the wage level in China, but I am aware that it's increasing significantly. So I guess that would be one big part of a decision to move from China to Vietnam, and Vietnam still has an advantage there. I would also think it's a diversification strategy to say, okay, don't put all eggs in one basket, and China has gained a lot of attention. It is still a huge market, of course, but it has already made a step, I would say. So it is then also to diversify and make potential of this other big market, ASEAN, which is coming up and going stronger. And of course also the countries themselves have some advantages, like we mentioned. So maybe it's also seen more advantageous just in a simple cost-benefit analysis to go to Vietnam rather than China. maybe because there were incentives offered by the government. For some sectors, the government holds tax incentives, so that could be a reason. It's a bit speculation, but I can confirm that we do see the trend that a lot of companies, a lot of EU companies that have moved to China, let's say 5 or 10 years ago, are now evaluating to get into Vietnam or to get into other ASEAN countries. So we have a question in relation to law again, and I can just also confirm that we will repeat the question clearly before we answer them for the next one.
Hi. The next question is the investment law also connected to the work permit for foreigners? The answer is not totally yet and not totally no. Investment law basically provide the policy on condition for foreign investor to come in, or what condition they need to meet, or what privilege they would get, depending on the sector, of course. A permit for foreigners is somehow connected to the project of the investment, but is more on the side of administration and HR side. So it is just, I would say it's a part that is quite relevant to the investment law, but it's not connected. I don't think so. So I hope that answered your question. The next question, I think, would be for Jana again.
I can read the question, which is, how often will this investment law be changed, adjusted according to the Asian Economic Community? Is there any fixed time schedule for that? We are looking at each other here, and
Okay, I can.
I think Tao will be in the best position to answer that, but we can also come back to you on that, because I don't think we have the clear answer for you in this room today. So let us get back to you on that. I think that's a bit easier rather than giving you some incomplete information at this stage. Let me just see if we have any more questions.
I have one.
Let me also point out that we will send you the slides after this presentation, or that you will have access to the broadcast as well. And once again, we are also happy to get questions after we finish, and we'll get back to you with a complete answer on all of them.
Hello, we have another question here relating to the WTO commitment. What sector newly opened in 2015? In 2015, there are two sectors that on top of my mind is food and beverage, and services incidental to manufacturing. The food and beverage, according to the Vietnamese commitment, within 8 years after accessions, which means the 12th of January in 2015, the food and beverage will be opened fully to foreign investor. Before that, the investment in food and beverage by foreign investor would have to be provided in parallel with investment in hotel construction, renovation, restoration, or acquisition. So if you come in Vietnam now, you would see a lot of new restaurant and food and beverage investment in this year. The sector opened in 2015 is service incidental to manufacturing. According to the commitment, after 3 years from accession, only joint venture with the foreign ownership not exceeding 50% would be allowed. But from this year, 100% foreign owned would be allowed. So that's the latest on the WTO commitment.
Okay, if we don't have any further questions, which I don't see at the moment, I'm waiting, but if I don't see anybody typing, I think I would conclude this webinar now. I just mentioned we will send you the slides and give you access to the broadcast, so you can always access this information. Also saying that it was a brief overview, so you find much more information on our website. And please take some minutes to fill in our survey. That would be very helpful for us. I would like to thank you for participating this morning or afternoon, and look forward to hearing you for the next one. Thank you very much.